But you see, it even extends into Romania, and in other maps, it keeps extending out into parts of Serbia. So this is the Lemko region. And this is a linguistic map. And if you look, this is supposed to be the Lemko. Sorry, it's a little unclear, but this is the Lemko dialect, or rather the Rusin dialect, which extends here and goes even further. So you have a very unique Slavic identity happening in this part of the world. The alphabet, I never knew there was an official Lemko alphabet. I thought it was just Slavonic. But if you look, it's pretty standard Cyrillic, except there are two G sounds, which I never even knew until I did a little research. Have you ever seen that? It's a G and a G.
No, good. Good and good.
G and K. Those are the two differences. But that's also a G, the X. Okay. All right. Now I know. And of course, you know, the language, the alphabet came from St. Cyril and Methodius, who were two apostles that baptized the Slavic people. You know, it's based on the Greek alphabet. It became standardized with Church Slavonic, and then this is how the specific Lemko alphabet evolved. Review of that one. Linguistically, Ponoshomo, I always found to be a very interesting language, it was my first language growing up. So it was very easy to learn Polish, to learn Russian, to learn Ukrainian. I went to Prague, I had a big argument on the subway train with the police. I spoke Ponoshomo, I got out of a ticket. So there's a lot with Ponoshomo. There's a lot of influences. All Slavic languages have that. If you think in Ponoshomo, if you say I don't know, it's ja ne znam. In Serbian, it's ja ne znam. In Ukrainian, it's ja ne znaju. Ne znaju. And in Russian, ja ne znaju. So there's definitely some connection with the Balkans. The original European immigrations, a lot of them happened through the Carpathian Mountains. And I know myself, when I went in for I did the DNA test with 21andMe, I was 60% Eastern European, 38.5% Balkan, 0.5% German, 0.5% French, and 0.5% Tuva, which is Mongolian. So a lot of that intermingling, especially with Lemkos, you had the original immigration coming in. You had so many different trade routes, so many different influences, and then when the Mongols took over Rus, you had lots of Eastern Slavs fleeing, which also added to this gigantic mix of people. So here we are today. Around about the 1800s, people began there started to be more of national identity with the Rusins. They were part of the Austrian Empire, but these are some pictures from the early 1800s describing Ruthenian people, and this kind of idea that something separate from mainstream Austro-Hungarianism existed. One of the first sort of Rusin nationalists, or people who created Rusin identity, was Alexander Dutkanicz. He was a Uniat priest, a poet, and a writer, and he wrote a famous book, Ja Rusin Bil, and this became sort of one of the first Rusin slogans. Ja Rusin Bil, ja sam i budu. I was a Rusin, I am, and I will be. He really did a lot for beginning a national identity. And when he wrote, he didn't just write in Rusin. He used a language called Yazychia, which combined Church Slavonic with local Rusin dialects. If anyone knows Church Slavonic, it's really just a potpourri of Slavic words. Thank you. I know reading some of the prayers, you have Polish words. Like one of the prayers after communion is Gospodi, ja wiem. Wiem is a Polish word. How is it in Church Slavonic? Well, there's all these words which is kind of out there. And he did very much for that. And as the Rusin identity became more and more pronounced, there was a Russophile movement, which was just an attempt at having some kind of national identity that wasn't Austrian or German. And this translated into a movement of orthodoxy. There were many, many villages. I think my parents' villages became Orthodox. I think it was called the Tilava Schism by the Uniat Church. And there was, coinciding with this national identity was a return to Orthodoxy. One of the key figures was Saint Maxim Sandovich on the far left. And I'm not sure who the other three people are. If anyone has an idea, I'd love to know. I did a lot of research I couldn't find. So this was one of the early Rusin, who was it? No. So this was a very early Rusin movement. Saint Maxim grew up Uniat. He visited Pachayev. He converted later in life, finished Orthodox seminary. He was ordained by Metropolitan Antoni Krapowicki of Kiev. And he was eventually arrested by the Austrian authorities and executed. And in 1994, I believe, he was canonized. So this is the church on the left in Gorlice, Poland, that has its relics. And on the right is an icon with the events of his life, including his martyrdom in Gorlice by the Austrians. So coinciding also with this new nationalist movement, this return to Orthodoxy, there was a huge persecution by the Austrians. And the most famous persecution was at the Camp Talleyrand, which is a precursor to our event today. Many Lemkos were sent. These are the barracks. These are the gallows. I don't even know how many thousands of Lemkos were executed by the Austrians. But it wasn't a happy time. It was very sad. There's an excellent collection in Higganum, Connecticut, the Tallerhoff Archives. Paul Best is a professor at University of Connecticut who runs the archive. And hopefully starting this summer, there's a June annual event. Really, he has firsthand artifacts, the cross that they use in the altar, I think the City Sviechnik from the back. So really an incredible collection. But we survived Tallerhoff, we survived World War I. What to do now? The idea of nation building still existed, and the Lemkos had their own country for 2 years. I think this is where the flag that we use was adopted. There were stamps. I don't know if there was currency, but I'd like to get some of that. The world was a mess after World War I, and within all that chaos and anarchy, the Lemkos somehow organized their own country for 2 years. They didn't have to fight a war. They didn't have to shoot any weapons. They just organized, and they were all together. So after World War I, after this republic, what was life like for the Lemkos? It wasn't easy, but it was generally peaceful compared to all the evil that was just going on the years before. So the Lemkos somehow survived. I'll just show you a few pictures from my family between World War I and World War II. This is my great-grandmother.
Yeah.
This is an Eastbid.
Yeah,
The left is my grandmother.
that's my parents,
And then on the right is my grandfather's wedding day in Borne. Dmitry Dutkanicz and Maria Dokova. few years later, right before World War II, here's a picture of my father, my uncle, my aunt, and my grandparents. So it's Mitro Dutkanicz, and the man holding the dog is right there.
We went to the dogs.
And this is the Easter before Akcja Wisła. I think it was, which village could this be? It's not Bielanka. Might be. So, this is it. This is the calm before the storm. This is the last Lemko Pascha of Lemko land for these people. So, right after this, World War II started. There were, you could say, a few phases that affected the Lemkos. First, of course, was the German invasion. The German army usually took over people's homes. For the most part, they were businesslike. They weren't really out to exterminate us, but it wasn't pleasant having them around. After a few years, the Soviet army began its campaign in the Carpathian Mountains and eventually pushed back the Germans. Here they are fighting. I think this was in Carpathian. And what really turned the tide for the Soviets were the Katyusha rockets. And I remember my dad telling me when one morning they heard the Katyusha rockets, the Germans were out in an hour or two. So the Russians came through with their Katyusha rockets, and for them, it was a job well done to get rid of the Germans. Now, at the same time, the Russians came, they had to go to Berlin, and as they were retreating, they were explaining to Lemkos that their future wasn't certain, and if they would come with them, they had the opportunity, because they said there's going to be a big mess coming up. So right around this time, you have the rise of the Ukrainian Partisan army. On the left is one of their propaganda posters. Of course, and they were all under their leader, Stephen Bandera. And they were growing as the Soviets were retreating. They, of course, had a chance to get bigger and stronger, and they recruited. These were some members from the UPA. You can see the Trizut flag on the left. And eventually, the UPA made their way to the Carpathian Mountains. And of all the groups, they were probably not the kindest to the locals. And they, once the Soviets were gone, the Poles started, their army was growing. And this is General Karol Sieczewski, who was a very high-ranking Polish general. And the UPA assassinated him. And that was the last straw, pretty much for our history. After World War II, you can see how the borders changed in Poland. That all the land shaded on the left was given to Poland. The land on the right was taken away. So with all of this new land, with millions of your own citizens killed, and with this ragtag group running around causing trouble in the Carpathian Mountains, there was an edict to create Operation Wisła, Akcja Wisła. This was aimed at deporting all of the Lemko population, because they were accused of being members of the UPA. I'm going to read something by Bogdan Orthodox. He wrote an excellent article on Akcja Wisła, and I have some of his materials up here, which I'll discuss later. But Bogdan writes, on April 28, 1947, Polish communist authorities began Operation Vistula, which they argued was to eliminate the activity of the Ukrainian insurgent army. DUPA. One way to support this goal, according to them, was to resettle the civil Ukrainian and Lemko populations to the western and northern territories of Poland. Suspected UPA collaborators were to be imprisoned at the central labor camp in the city of Jaworzno, formerly a part of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The first prisoners were brought in early of May 1947. At least 543 people from the Lemko region were eventually held there. The majority of them were Lemkos, but some Poles were also among them. Most had no ties to the UPA and were victims of ethnic persecution. They were brought from local prisons and railway stations where the resettled population was loaded on the trains and were later pulled from transports during a stopover in the city of Auschwitz. Due to brutal interrogations, torture, poor food and hygiene, all suffered the loss of health, while 18 Lemkos died. Prisoners were gradually released beginning in late December of 1947, while some were moved to other prisons. The Ukrainian Lemko part of the camp was closed in 1949. So this was the launching of Operation Wisła. This is what ethnic cleansing looks like. You have very innocent people being forced out of their homes. Homes being burned, people being gathered, interrogated, tortured. Entire villages being escorted. Lots of times people had to take horses or carriages for miles. And it was a real tragedy against humanity. But of course, this is the end of World War II. People are tired. No one's going to shed a tear for Lemkos in 1947. No one's going to intervene. So here we are. We have to suffer. We have to live through it. And this is one of the many paintings. I won't go into all the details, but hopefully when we interview people, we'll have a chance to discuss it a little bit more. So they were sent out. Many times they were sent to homes like this, or like this. This wasn't really that abnormal for Lemkos to come into. Should go back to the three arrows slide. So if you look, there were three main movements, and you have Krakowskie were 10,000, Rzeszowskie was 85,000, Lubelskie was 44,000 people. You see some of the big points in green. You had Olsztyn, Szczecin, Poznań, and Wrocław. My father's family was sent up north to Olsztyn, and my mother's family was sent west to near Wrocław and Legnica. So the whole aim was to water down or diffuse Lemko culture. You had these burnt out, destroyed German villages where they would put 2 or 3 Lemko families here and there, dispersing them, and just really, that's how they tried to destroy us. And so this is the first part of the tragedy. Then came the prisons. This, I believe, is Stephen Filanchuk. He was from. Was he from? I think yeah, he was from Portland. He was a stonemason. He was arrested. He was sent to Auschwitz. He was in Dachau. He was in about 8 or 9 different prisons, and he survived them all. Now, the main, as I mentioned, Jaworzno is, if you look at the map, you see Auschwitz on the right. Jaworzno is right here, and that was, during the German times, there was a subcamp of Auschwitz, and it went by 2 names. It was either the Lager Dachsgrub or the Arbeitslager Ludax. After the Germans were defeated, at its height, it had about 3,000 to 4,000 prisoners. And after the Germans, the camp was liberated as the Russians were going through. And of course, this was very convenient for the Poles. They had a war camp that they could send Lemkos to. This is the plan. These were the gates. That's the design for the gates. More barracks. Beds. It's a memorial. Some pictures. And now there's a coal mine nearby, which some prisoners were sent to. The lucky ones. This was it was a camp, this was the officers' building. So here's a shot of the gates. And this is how it looks today. Yelvorshna is a beautiful town, and it's almost scary how something so evil just disappeared into the background. So that was the camp where my grandfather spent about 10 months there, right? And after Akcja Wisła, some Lemkos were able to return, about 5,000 in the 1950s. This is a picture of my mom coming to visit her home with her family. This is, I think, in the 1960s. And after all the fear, all the terror, Lemkos started to pick themselves up again. These are three very early statesmen of Lemkos, Goch, Donsky, and Stefanowski. They did a lot to really jumpstart Lemko preservation in Poland. Of course, Petro Krokowski, who's kind of the godfather of the Renaissance man of Lemkos. He's organized lots of cultural festivals. They really put their neck on the line in the 50s and 60s to get things moving. But thankfully, Lemkos were strong enough. They started building churches. They were able to organize, and kind of they began clustering, and things started getting much better. They were able to build monuments. And if you look in Zitna, they also have a monument, and all the parishes, all the organizations started having a new Lemko consciousness. They out of all the ashes, a new Lemko consciousness arose. They organized, Lemkos love vatras. So there was vatras became popular, the best way for people to organize. I think the next slide, this was one of the first from the 1980s. This was the Lemko Vena ensemble. And this is the Kinchata ensemble, which I believe is from Legnica. So all these, this is Maria, who's a famous singer. So through all these festivals, people started having something to look forward to. They could speak your language again. You didn't exist in this. This is a challenge. You didn't exist in a bubble any longer. You could speak your language. You could be who you really were. You didn't have to plug yourself into something you're not. And in the last, I would say, 10 to 20 years, there's been an incredible Lemko renaissance in Poland. They've done all these ensembles. People aren't afraid to write down Lemko on a census sheet. And I would say one of the pinnacles of the Lemko renaissance is FM, the radio station. Of a 24-hour Lemko radio station in Gorlice, which 50 years ago would have been considered criminal. So I'm very optimistic about Lemko future. Sometimes it's depressing. You feel alone when you're a Lemko. It's really sad. You inherited a lot of responsibility that you have to grow into. But what do? We get together, We have organizations. This is the Talberhoff Archives in Higganum, Connecticut. Bunch of characters in there. We have little reunions in America. This is a Bortman crew at my parents' home in Connecticut. Another big resource that I don't think a lot of Lenkos know about is Holy Trinity Monastery in upstate New York. The last metropolitan of the Russian Church abroad was Lidolavra Shkurla. He was from Ladomirovo, Slovakia. He was a Lenko, very, very, very nice guy, preserved his culture. And he, in the bottom right corner, he was succeeded as the abbot by Vladika Luke Murianka, a Lenko from Pennsylvania. And to his right is the number 2 in charge of Holy Trinity Monastery, Michael Pavuk, another Lenko from Pennsylvania. So there's an incredible little Lenko pocket in this monastery in upstate New York. And I just want to say that it's important for all Lenkos to realize we're all brothers, we're all friends, and we all have to help ourselves, and if we...
Father Andrew.
I think we got a new one. So there's been a lot of tears, but we have our faith, we have God, we have each other. Let's all do a better job at preserving our lives.